The Rules Committee will come to order. Today we're considering H.R. 7608, our first appropriations minibus for the 2021 fiscal year. This measure includes state foreign operations, agriculture, rural development, interior, environment, military construction, and veterans affairs appropriations. There are a lot of important priorities here. More than $10 billion in emergency funding to combat the coronavirus. More than $5 billion in discretionary funding for women, infants, and children. More than $25 billion in mandatory funding for child nutrition programs to provide things like free and reduced price school lunches for our kids. More than $10 billion in defense funding to get our service members and military families the resources that they've earned. And language that puts an important check on this administration, from preventing it from stealing more funds to be used on its ineffective border wall to blocking its offensive SNAP rules, which would have taken meals away from those who need them. We have also hundreds and hundreds of amendments submitted to make this measure even stronger. But before I go any further, though, I want to say a few words about our friend and colleague, Nita Lowey, the esteemed chairwoman of the second most powerful committee in the Congress. Nita is retiring at the end of this Congress. That means that today is one of the last times that the chairwoman Lowey will be before this committee. I know the most powerful committee in the Congress. So I'd like to tell my friend thank you. Born in the Bronx, Chairwoman Lowey went to college at Mount Holyoke, the oldest of the 7 sister colleges, and importantly, it's located just outside my district in Western Massachusetts. I'm sure that it was her time in the Commonwealth that drove Nita to embark on a storied career in public service and for her decades of tireless work on behalf of the nation and her progressive policies, which we all appreciate. And storied it was. That little newspaper in New York, you might have heard of it, called her courageous, and with good reason. Nita spent her career in Congress fighting for everything from education and healthcare to foreign assistance and human rights around the globe. Yet through all of her successes, possibly the most important legacy Nita will leave behind is one of true leadership in her relentless, persistent advancement of women and girls. The Boston Globe, the actual paper of record, I might add, said this about Nita, and I quote, "She speaks for the world's victimized women and girls as if they were voters in her district," end quote. I don't think the Boston Globe ever said anything half as nice about me, but it is absolutely true when it comes to Nita Lowey. Whether in the most recent remote, whether in the most remote corners of the globe or here on Capitol Hill, Nita has spent her life and career in the pursuit of lifting up women and girls, advancing them to very much deserved positions of power, and ensuring that the rights and liberties, the very promise of this nation, shine down on our nation's women. Not just to improve the lives of women, but because Chairwoman Lowey knows that the mark of a fair and just nation is reflected in our treatment of women and the many others who too often have been left behind. So from your friend from Massachusetts, I want to thank you for showing me through example how to do this work with purpose, with grace, and with gratitude. That said, your work is not done here yet, and so let's get back to work. And at this time, I'd like to turn to our ranking member, Mr. Cole, for any comments that he wishes to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by associating myself and reinforcing your very generous praise of my chair as a member of the Appropriations Committee to our departing chairwoman. And I agree with almost everything you said, Mr. Chair, but I will actually say that my friend, Chair Lowey, actually chairs the most important committee, because if she doesn't choose to fund you, you can't meet. So at the end of the day, she always has the last word. And 30 years.
I stand corrected.
That's the first time you've ever been that generous to me, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. But 30 years, as you point out, of absolutely distinguished service in every way to this institution, to this country, and to people beyond the borders of this country. And nobody does it with more grace and more style and more fairness and more inclusiveness than my good friend, the chair, who I've been honored to serve with and will miss very, very greatly, as this entire Congress will. And I think this country and certainly her district will. So You get to choose the time that you leave, most of the time around here. And in this case, I respect the chair's decision to choose to end her service after 30 years. But boy, are we going to all miss her and all miss what she brings to the deliberations and the decorum in this body. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for opening up with that extraordinarily appropriate praise of our colleague and our mutual friend, Chair Loy. Mr. Chair, we're here today to consider the first set of fiscal year 2021 appropriations bill. As a member of the Appropriations Committee, it's always encouraging to see the appropriations process moving forward. However, I am disappointed by the package before us. Today's meeting will provide a rule for debating 4 of the 12 annual appropriations bills covering the state and foreign operations, agriculture and rural development, interior and environment, and military construction and veteran affairs titles. While I recognize the hard work that went into crafting these bills and the great leadership of both Chair Loy and Ranking Member Granger, I continue to have deep reservations about the package, and as such, I cannot support it in its current form. As with any appropriations bill, all members will undoubtedly find something they like in the bill. I acknowledge that the 4 bills in this package include some items that Republicans will like, but far too many items in these 4 bills were written to satisfy the concerns of one party, that of the majority. Completing our work on appropriations for this year will require reaching a bipartisan deal that both parties will support. Unfortunately, these bills do not meet that test. During the markup on these measures in the Appropriations Committee, Republicans raised a number of concerns. The bills are marked to 302B allocation numbers that call for a total spending level that is well above the current budget agreement. In particular, the bills include large amounts of emergency designated spending that fall outside the budget process and thus fall outside of regular work. The use of these budget gimmicks not only violates the funding levels of the bipartisan budget agreement with the administration reached in the summer of 2019, but such an approach will make it more difficult to negotiate final bills that actually become law. And what's worse, Mr. Chairman, the bills include harmful partisan policy riders that are simply unacceptable. I myself am deeply concerned about policy riders in this package that would prevent the Trump administration from implementing the Mexico City policy, which prohibits U.S. taxpayer funds from being used by organizations that provide or promote abortion services abroad. Other provisions that weaken existing long-standing pro-life protections and provisions that provide funding for the UN Population Fund, an agency which supports coercive abortion and involuntary sterilization across the globe. In addition, this bill blocks the president from utilizing the resources needed to secure our southern border. Partisan riders like these must come out before a bipartisan agreement can be reached. Mr. Chairman, I'm still hopeful that we can reach a bipartisan appropriations deal for the full year. Certainly, there's an appetite for such a deal among my fellow Appropriations Committee members on both sides of the aisle. And while I cannot support these bills as written, and while I support a full and open amendment process on the floor, give all members an opportunity to be heard, at the end of the day, I believe we will get to a final bipartisan deal. I look forward to a future Rules Committee hearing on a bipartisan bicameral appropriations agreement that will have my full support. For that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his statement, and he yields back. I would like to welcome our witnesses to provide testimony on HR 7608, a 4-bill minibus package that includes state and foreign operations, agriculture and rural development, interior and environment, military construction, and veterans affairs appropriations for fiscal year 2021. State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee Chairwoman Lowy and Ranking Member Rogers, Ag Subcommittee Chairman Bishop and Ranking Member Fortenberry, Interior Subcommittee Chairwoman McCullum and Ranking Member Joyce, Milcon Subcommittee Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz and Ranking Member Carter. We are delighted that you're here. Without objection, any written materials you submit to rules documents at mail.house.gov before the conclusion of the hearing will be entered into the record. Let me just say to our witnesses and to all the members of the panel, we have votes coming up at some point in the next couple of hours or so. And so that may interrupt things, but hopefully we can get our work at least the hearing portion of this done before then, if we can. And so I would urge the witnesses and everybody to be succinct, and we get through this. So with that, I turn it over to Chairwoman Lowy for any opening remarks she may wish to make. Welcome.
Thank you very, very much. And I want to thank you, my dear friend, Chairman McGovern, for those very generous remarks. And to our ranking member, Cole, you've both been good friends. And for me, it's been such an honor, not just to work with you, but to know you, to travel with you. And although I felt this was the time, and I feel very comfortable with making this decision, I will miss you all. So thank you again for your very generous remarks. I appreciate the opportunity to present HR 7608, the first legislative package of fiscal year 2021 appropriation bills. The package is the product of months of thoughtful deliberation and input from members on both sides of the aisle. I'm so proud of the work we have completed under the incredibly difficult circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. The appropriations package addresses urgent national priorities. I'm particularly pleased that we have provided strong funding and protections to help put nutritious food on people's tables during this time of economic crisis and rising food insecurity. Increased investments in broadband to connect more Americans to work, school, healthcare, and family. Included robust funding to protect the environment and build resilience to climate change. Appropriated $12.5 billion in emergency funding to address sharply rising veterans' health care costs. I'm also proud that the package includes strong emergency appropriations to confront coronavirus and support economic recovery with investments in critical infrastructure and coronavirus preparedness, response, and relief domestically and globally. These are just a few highlights of our bills. Our cardinals will provide more examples of investments that will expand opportunities for every person in every corner of the nation. Turning to the State Foreign Operations Division, with a total of $65.87 billion, the bill rejects the president's go-it-alone approach to foreign policy. To confront today's global challenges, from poverty to civil war, climate change to violent extremism, our bill provides strong investments in security and humanitarian assistance, multilateral assistance initiatives like food security, global health programs tackling HIV/AIDS, TB, and malaria, meeting the challenge of the coronavirus. The bill provides $10 billion in emergency funding to support a coordinated global response to this scourge and to ensure COVID-19 does not derail decades of development gains. The bill provides $3.8 billion in base funding for development assistance, including basic education. The bill also restores funding to the World Health Organization to ensure the United States maintains influence in the operations of an organization critical to the development and distribution of vaccines. For the health and safety of women, the bill oversees, it reverses the president's global gag rule and stops counterproductive restrictions on family planning and health funding, while including robust funding to ensure that millions of women can access critically needed health care. The bill bolsters international security and increases funding for many of our critical partners. I am particularly proud that as a bipartisan priority, the bill includes $50 million to fund a new partnership for peace in the Middle East that would strengthen economic development and engagement between Palestinians and Israelis through people-to-people programs and economic ventures. Additionally, the bill prioritizes the security of diplomatic and development staff, their families, and the facilities where they work, with $6.1 billion for embassy security, which is $692.2 million above the president's request. Critically, to address Trump administration policies that harm our neighbors beyond our southern border and drive migration, the bill amends prior year appropriations acts to significantly limit the president's ability to redirect assistance outside of the region. Mr. Chairman, the Appropriations Committee is charged with one of the most important responsibilities entrusted to Congress by the Constitution, the power of the purse. I am proud that we abuse that power to make investments that will make the world better, safer, and healthier, and give every person a better chance at a better life. I request an appropriate rule for floor consideration of H.R. 7608. And again, it's a pleasure, Mr. Chairman, for me to be here. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and I know we'll have plenty of time to continue this discussion in the weeks ahead. Thank you for your gracious introduction. And to my friend, Mr. Cole, as well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and we all love you here. So I now will turn to Ranking Member Rogers.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Cole. Let me join you in giving great accolades to Nita Loy, who is on her farewell tour of these here parts with this appropriations package. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to discuss this four-bill package, and specifically Division A, the State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Act for 2021. I salute Chairman Loy for her tremendous effort to get these bills before the committee today under such difficult circumstances. We have some fundamental differences that cannot be bridged, but I appreciate the chair's willingness to work together where we could find some common ground. The State and Foreign Operations portion of the package provides important funding for our national security. It includes resources for many bipartisan priorities, such as funding for Israel and other key allies and partners, embassy security, and programs to counter transnational criminal organizations and the flow of illegal drugs. However, the bill includes numerous provisions that would reverse critical protections for the unborn, including two prohibitions of the expanded Mexico City policy and language that attempts to weaken long-standing protections against coercive abortion and forced sterilization. The bill also requires controversial and ill-advised funding to the tune of $500 million for international climate funds, including the Green Climate Fund. We know for certain that if left unmodified, the president would veto this bill the moment it hits his desk. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I remain concerned about unchecked spending. The funding in the State Foreign Operations Bill is an increase of nearly $1.2 billion above the current level. There's also emergency spending included in many of these bills outside of the caps that were agreed to last year. We need to carefully consider the long-term consequences of spending increases of this magnitude. Mr. Chairman, I hope the committee will report out a rule that allows for an open and transparent process. We need a rule that permits consideration of amendments that will give this package a better shot at becoming law. Thank you for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. I would now like to turn to Chairman Sanford Bishop.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Mr. Ranking Member Cole. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the loss of our colleague and my friend of over 52 years, Congressman John Lewis. He was an icon, and his commitment to love, peace, grace, and forgiveness should inspire us all. He risked his life to create a better world, and while there's work to do, he left an everlasting impression. I'd like to begin by thanking our subcommittee's distinguished ranking member, Mr. Fortenberry. This is our second year working together, and I really appreciate the ranking member's intense commitment to rural America and his passion for having a healthy dialogue that makes this process much easier and effective. I'm grateful for his friendship and his cooperation during this very highly unusual year. I also want to say a special thank you to Chairwoman Lowy. It has been a tremendous pleasure and honor to work with you, and I thank you for your leadership and your vision. And I want to thank Ranking Member Granger for her help in steering our committee forward. Ms. Granger and Ms. Lowy are models of dedication to public service, and as I've said before, they set a fine example for how members from different sides of the aisle can work together in a bipartisan way through our differences on issues to arrive at a consensus that benefits the American people. As chairman of the Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration and Related Agencies Appropriations Subcommittee, I'm proud to present our division of the bill, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the important investments that we're making. Our fiscal year 2021 allocation is almost $24 billion, which is 2% above FY20. And it once again rejects the administration's draconian cuts to rural communities and vulnerable populations. Mr. Chairman, I'll begin with an issue that I know you care very deeply about, and that's food security. Even before the pandemic, too many Americans struggled to put food on the table. Now, with unemployment soaring and food banks stretched to their limits, hunger is a reality for millions of families. Our bill fully funds the SNAP, Child Nutrition, and WIC programs to meet the expected participation in FY21. The bill funds smaller but critical nutrition programs that are proven to reduce hunger. The summer EBT program is funded at $50 billion, and the school breakfast expansion grants are funded at $15 million. It also blocks two unconscionable SNAP rules: the able-bodied adults without dependents final rule and the standard utility allowance proposed rule are both designed to restrict program eligibility. With respect to international food aid, we rejected the proposed elimination of the Food for Peace and McGovern-Dole programs, and instead we provide increases for both programs to ensure American agriculture remains a tool for diplomacy. Respectively, we provide $1.75 billion and $235 million for these programs, an increase totaling $65 million. Last year, I told this committee that I believe that the zip code into which a youngster is born should not prevent him or her from realizing their full potential. My belief in that is stronger than ever. The coronavirus pandemic has made everyone aware of how important it is that students and workers be connected to the internet, and our bill reflects that. The Reconnect program is funded at $990 million, an increase of $435 million or 78%. In total, the bill provides more than $3.2 billion in budget authority for rural development programs to fund critical infrastructure, such as water and wastewater systems and rural housing needs. The bill once again includes the 10-20-30 anti-poverty formula, the provision for rural development programs that's designed to target much-needed federal resources to rural communities in need. Persistent poverty communities for too long have suffered from neglect, and this provision will assist in reversing that and help these communities to thrive. This bill also makes critical investments in agriculture research. to ensure that America retains its role as the leader in global agriculture science. And it provides more than $2.8 billion in farm and conservation programs. It provides it prohibits USDA from increasing the speed at which lands in processing plants for meat operate unless OSHA certifies that the increase in land speeds would not have an adverse impact on worker safety. Now, the Food and Drug Administration is funded at $3.2 billion in discretionary funding, and the increased funding is dedicated to new initiatives that would advance influenza vaccine technologies and enhance the safety of medical products and our nation's food supply, especially in light of COVID-19. The bill also gives the FDA the authority to require mandatory recalls of unsafe prescription and over-the-counter drugs. This is the same authority that the FDA already has to recall unsafe foods, infant formula, vaccines, and medical devices, a need that has become increasingly apparent over the past few weeks. Now, the bill also funds the Commodity Futures Trading Commission at $304 million, which is the same as the request. The Agricultural Subcommittee is known for its bipartisanship, and we lived up to that reputation again. Working cooperatively with our colleagues across the aisle, we reached consensus on all but a few issues and have produced a strong bill that benefits all Americans, and I'm proud to say it was supported from full committee by voice vote. Finally, I want to thank our personal staffs, Michael Reed, Maya Solomon, the subcommittee staff, Martha Foley, and the others on the subcommittee staff, as well as the minority staff, Tom O'Brien, for their cooperation and their collaboration in putting this bill together. A special thanks to our majority clerk, Shalonda Young, for her steady hand in leading the majority full committee. I thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. I think it's a great bill, and I look forward to getting it to the floor, and we can get it passed and send it on to the Senate.
Thank you very much. I now would like to turn to Ranking Member Fortenberry.
Thank you, Chair McGovern, for the opportunity to speak, and thank you, Ranking Member Cole. I too appreciate the option to appear today before the Rules Committee to discuss the Agricultural Appropriations Bill. But before I get into some details, let me first acknowledge the service of our Chair, Ms. Lowy. I am so grateful for fundamentally her graciousness, her friendship, her spirit of openness to dialogue, and especially the example of the way in which she has worked with Ms. Granger, our ranking member, to shepherd the activities of the committee. I also want to thank my good friend and ranking member, Chairman Bishop, for the close working relationship that we have developed, his willingness to accommodate many, many requests from our side of the aisle. I really authentically value the constructive manner in which we were able to express our perspectives on things and find good solutions. Mr. Chairman, the good news is that this bill largely reflects the cooperative spirit of the agricultural community in America and of this committee. Let me summarize all of this important work in one word: food. It's about food. Without food, everything around us collapses, and fast. We don't think about it much, but the policies we create, the services we provide, the richness of our resources, the ingenuity of our farmers and ranchers, the support, the technological support of our university systems has given America a stable food production system that is the best in the world. And whatever policy differences we may have, it is clear that the decisions in this bill affect the life of every American from every walk of life and across communities throughout our country. I'd like to highlight three important areas of the bill: rural broadband, food security, and our nation's drug supply. Mr. Chairman, the pandemic that has swept upon us notably has created the reality of a digital leap. This reality has huge implications for a 21st century architecture of how America works, how America learns, and how America seeks healthcare. Telemedicine, teleeducation, and telework are here to stay. But here's our policy challenge. Too many parts of the country have no access to high-speed internet, about 35% of rural areas, and 40% of tribal lands lack access. In Columbus, Nebraska, an agricultural rural centered town of about 25,000, I'm told of a mother who had to drive her child to the parking lot of the public school in order to help the child do their homework by gaining access to the public broadband in the school. I think we can do better than that, and that's why I'm pleased that this Ag bill, under Chairman Bishop's leadership, provides over $1 billion for high-speed internet access, and importantly, creates the metrics for what I call the ecosystem of livability, a new way to look at the traditional ideas of rural development. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and appreciate your leadership on making sure vulnerable Americans have proper nutrition. Members of both sides of the aisle have shown strong support for programs including the Women's, Infants, and Children Nutrition Program, WIC, Commodity Supplemental Food Program for needy elderly, as well as the discretionary mandatory nutrition programs that are in this bill. Mr. Chairman, I think you'll appreciate this. At the height of the pandemic, I visited a food bank site, one that I normally don't go to. I frankly was shocked by what I saw. A line of cars about a quarter mile long. In fact, the director told me, he said, these are people who used to volunteer for us and now seek our help. Third, Mr. Chairman, I want to talk about how the bill addresses our drug supply. There are a number of provisions here to address our nation's troubling dependency on medicines and medical supplies produced overseas, including from China. The bill provides funding and direction for a pilot program in both India and China to allow investigators from the Food and Drug Administration to conduct unannounced and short-notice inspections of drug manufacturing facilities. It also directs the FDA to come up to plan for blocked entry of products from those plants that will not allow FDA officials to immediately inspect and review their facilities. Speaking personally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see the Made in America label on the bottle of medicines. Finally, it's important to discuss a few current challenges that are at the source of some disagreement we have in the bill. One of the objections relates to the budget used by the majority to fund these 12 bills. We are violating the law we all agreed to in the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2019. Another objection is less about numbers and more about the lives of men, women, and children and our commitment to one another. The pandemic has resulted in major trauma, high unemployment, and real suffering for so many Americans. Accordingly, we all agreed it was necessary to suspend requirements for certain SNAP recipients to seek work opportunity. We all agreed that the maximum allotment of benefits to all households during our current ongoing public emergency was the right thing to do, the reasonable thing, the compassionate thing. When times are good and the economy is strong, I do believe, though, the program should be allowed to adjust accordingly. And here is the problem. In the bill, we have removed permanently the work requirements for capable individuals without dependents up to the age of 50. Access to meaningful work gives a person well-being, support, and societal participation. And a truly holistic approach to helping others should always integrate work when possible, as when our economy improves. As we further deliberate on these issues in the very near future, it is certainly my preference, Mr. Chairman, and I think everyone's, to let all the good in this bill to shine and to continue with our normal bipartisan conversations that is the hallmark of the agricultural community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Chairwoman Betty McCullough.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern, Ranking Member Cole, members of the Rules Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the FY21 Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies Appropriation Bill. But first, like many others before me, I want to thank the Chair of the Full Committee, Ms. Lowy, and extend my gratitude for her outstanding leadership that she has provided this committee and the personal mentorship she has given me over the years. And of course, I couldn't do this work without having great partners. And so I will just take a second to just comment on one of them, Mr. Joyce, the ranking member, who I enjoy working with and brings a lot of thoughtful discussion to all of our hearings from the Great Lakes. Thank you, Ranking Member Joyce. Last year, House Democrats secured significant new investments in the environmental protection and land conservation within this bill. For fiscal year 2021, we are building upon those successes to advance the priorities of American families, ensuring that we have clean air and water to protect our children's health and protect our most special places and endangered species. and taking meaningful action in this bill to address climate change. The subcommittee is recommending a total of $36.8 billion in discretionary funding. This is an increase of $771 million over last year's enacted level. In addition to our regular appropriations, this bill includes $2.4 billion in fire cap adjusted funds for suppression operations. This brings the total funding for the wildland fire management to $5.7 billion. This bill includes $15 billion in emergency designated infrastructure investments for the Bureau of Indian Education, Indian Health Services, and the Environmental Protection Agency. These investments will increase access to quality healthcare, education, and help clean up contaminated lands, polluted water, and unhealthy air. As a result of the pending enactment of the Great American Outdoors Act in fiscal year 2021, I was listening to the debate on the floor just before we started, the Land and Water Conservation Fund will be fully funded at $900 million. This is the first time this has happened in over 40 years. Congratulations to all of our constituents who worked so hard to get this bill to the floor and to make it happen. But back to the bill at hand. This bill is a rejection of the dangerous policies and funding cuts proposed by the Trump administration. Instead, this bill moves us forward by investing in resources and ways to keep our communities safe and healthy. This bill invests in protection and preservation of our landscapes and our biodiversity. This bill also continues proudly our subcommittee's nonpartisan approach to addressing issues facing our Native American brothers and sisters. We are committed together to honoring our trust and treaty obligations, and I am proud that this bill moves us in the right direction. But we all know that there's more work to be done, a lot more work to be done in this area. I want to note that this bill contains policy provisions that protect our environment for now and future generations. Given the circumstances we find ourselves in with COVID-19, and the fact that many of these provisions passed with overwhelming support in the House floor last year and were requested by members of both sides of the aisle, I've included many of them in this bill. And additionally, this bill contains 3 provisions relating to end the use of Confederate symbols on our public land. This is not, Mr. Chairman, about erasing our history or denigrating anyone's heritage. This is about whether we're willing to do the hard work needed to confront the truth of our history and to work to right past wrongs. And in order to do that, it means ending the use of Confederate symbols, which continue to be used today to intimidate and terrorize millions of our fellow Americans. I am very proud of the work that this subcommittee has done and our staff, and I will thank them personally on the floor later. This committee and our personal offices worked very hard to produce this bill. This is a good bill. It makes important investments in the health of our communities and our environment, and I urge my colleagues to support it. And I thank you again to the members of the Rural Committee for the opportunity to testify on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I now yield to Ranking Member David Joyce.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern, Ranking Member Cole, and the members of the committee. While we may not be together in person, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the fiscal year 2021 Interior and Environment Appropriations Bill. I'd like to thank Subcommittee Chair, my friend, and fellow Great Lake advocate, Congresswoman Betty McCollum, for her hard work on fiscal year 21 bill. Chair McCollum has been a wonderful partner, and I commend her for her thoughtful and judicious way she's handled the business of the subcommittee during this unprecedented year. While I could have made some different decisions in crafting the bill, I appreciate Chair McCollum and her staff made a genuine effort to accommodate requests from members on both sides of the aisle and to address so many of our national priorities. The bill prioritizes funding to maintain our national parks, to prevent catastrophic wildfires, and to help tribal communities across Indian country with critical health care, education, and law enforcement needs, among others. And I am particularly grateful that this bill includes strong initiatives to protect the Great Lakes. As many of you know, the lakes are one of my highest priorities, so I was very pleased that the bill includes funding to build on prior year investments to reduce harmful algal blooms, address coastline erosion, and eradicate invasive Asian carp. Unfortunately, I cannot support the measure as written due to policy concerns in the proposed funding levels in the bill. This bill requires new policy riders, administrative provisions, and directives that would limit responsible natural resource development and prevent the administration from reducing regulatory burdens. Several provisions and proposed funding levels in this bill would also curtail our nation's energy independence by limiting conventional energy development. It is critical that we continue to support all of the above energy strategy that protects American jobs, reduces energy costs, and grows our economy. And while adding new controversial provisions, the bill simultaneously eliminates several long-standing common sense provisions that have enjoyed historical bipartisan support. I'm hopeful that as we move forward, Chair McCollum and I will be able to work through these policy disagreements just as we did last year. We must also address the spending in this bill before we can reach a final agreement. This bill benefits from off-budget emergency funding provided in other bills instead of using the savings from likely passage of the Great American Outdoors Act to offset the costs. This bill reallocates those funds. Additionally, the bill includes a new title with $15 billion in emergency infrastructure funding that the majority included without input from the minority. While we have an obligation to make investments that protect our infrastructure, environment, and public lands for future generations, we also have an obligation to be good stewards of our tax dollars. Despite these policy and funding concerns, I'm committed to working with Chair McCollum, Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Granger, and the rest of our colleagues to resolve these differences as we move through the fiscal 21-year process. I want to thank the Chairman and the Rules Committee for considering amendments to this bill from members on both sides of the aisle on the House floor. Thank you for your time and opportunity to testify before you today. I yield back.
Thank you very, very much. I now yield to Chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Rules Committee. I too want to join Mr. Bishop in our mourning and sorrow on the passing of a member from our region, Mr. John Lewis. Such a tragic loss, but one that I know we all at least are thankful, and I know I am personally thankful for being able to have served with him, gotten to know him, and have learned from him. And additionally, I join my colleagues in thanking Chairwoman Lowy for her service and for her mentorship. We had an opportunity to celebrate her and thank her for her work during our appropriations markups, and I want to make sure that I acknowledge that once again. I appreciate the opportunity to present the Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Division of HR 7608. I'm proud of the bill that we've put together that meets the needs of our service members, supports our military families, and provides for our veterans. The allocation of $115.5 billion in discretionary funding is $5.1 billion above the FY20 enacted funding level and $2.3 billion above the FY21 budget request. Within that total, the bill provides $10.4 billion for military construction, including OCO, the Overseas Contingency Operations. For the Department of Veterans Affairs, the bill provides a total of $240.2 billion, of which $104.8 billion is discretionary funding. And that's $12.3 billion above the FY20 enacted level and $35 million below the FY21 budget request. Clearly, we're making a big investment in the VA, and I believe this bill makes smart investments in critical projects and programs that make a real difference in the lives of service members and veterans. One of the things that I'm most proud of is that our division contains the vast majority of the requests that we received, 95% from members on both sides of the aisle. It reflects bipartisan priorities, and I would hope that it would achieve bipartisan support on the House floor. I want to take this opportunity to mention some of the highlights of the bill. As part of the military construction title, the bill supports needed military projects as well as investing in energy resilience at our military bases and provides $200 million to clean up PFAS and PFOA contamination at previously closed installations. It also dedicates resources toward military family housing, a really ongoing, vexing problem, to address unacceptable conditions like mold, vermin, and lead. At the Department of Veterans Affairs, the bill provides the funding needed for our veterans to receive the medical treatment and other benefits that they have earned. In particular, I'm proud that it makes significant investments in women's health, the Whole Health Initiative, mental health care, and suicide prevention. homelessness assistance, opioid abuse prevention and treatment, and rural health initiatives. The bill boosts funding for VA research by 5% over the FY20 enacted level to support the important work of studying rare cancers, toxic exposures, and prosthetics for women veterans, just to name a few, in hopes of bettering and protecting the lives of our veterans. It also provides funding for infrastructure improvements to ensure that VA has modern, safe facilities to treat our veterans, as well as supports continued implementation of the electronic health record implementation and efforts to reduce the disability claims backlog. Importantly, the bill does not allow the president to bypass congressional intent and divert vital military construction funding from previously approved and requested national security projects for the purpose of building an unnecessary and xenophobic border wall. Finally, the bill does not allow construction of projects on military installations named for Confederate officers unless a process to remove and replace those namesakes has begun. What it does do is invest in the programs that improve our military readiness and honor the veterans who have given so much through their service to our nation. And I look forward to seeing a rule that will enable this important measure to move forward to the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, Chairman McGovern and Republican Leader Cole, and the members of the committee. I thank you for the opportunity to testify before this committee virtually on the fiscal year 2021 Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Committee. I have some serious concerns about this bill. However, I am glad to participate in this hearing along with my subcommittee chairwoman, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, who is a pleasure to work with. I have some differences, but on the most important issues, we come together to support our troops, their families, and the nation's veterans. I know we will continue to do so as we work through this year's appropriations process. My first concern is the bill includes $12.5 billion in emergency funding for veterans programs. Each year, we are required to make difficult funding decisions. I feel it is irresponsible to simply designate some funds as emergency this year just to avoid these decisions. I recognize the budget realities we face, especially regarding the veterans' health care, but we should not set aside the 2019 bipartisan budget agreement as part of this year's appropriations process. I'm also concerned that the bill includes two general provisions that limit the president's ability to address the national emergency on our southern border. These provisions are similar to the ones included in last year's House bill, and ultimately they were not included in the conference agreement. I expect that issue will again be resolved when we finalize the spending bills later this year. In closing, as you prepare a rule for debate, I urge you to provide the members the opportunity to amend and improve the bill to its greatest extent possible. This will strengthen the bill and the House's position when we meet with the Senate in conference. Thank you again, Chairman McGovern and Ranking Member Cole, for holding this hearing, and to Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz for her partnership on important issues. She is a pleasure to work with and has conducted our hearings in a very bipartisan manner. I also would like to thank Chairwoman Lowy and Ranking Member Granger for their assistance on our bill and for their friendship. To say my goodbye to Nita Lowy. She is a joy to be around. I consider her a friend. And I want to wish her joy in life, happiness in her retirement, and good health. And I hope that whatever she does, I will be sure that she will be a warrior on behalf of the right issues. Thank you, Nita.
Thank you. Thank you very much for everybody for their testimony. I don't have any questions, but Mr. Forbury raised an issue that I'm very sensitive about, and that is the issue of the administration's imposed work requirements on SNAP recipients, on so-called people who are considered able-bodied adults without dependents. I just kind of feel I need to point out for the record a couple of things. One is that the majority of people who are able-bodied, the vast majority of people who are able-bodied adults who qualify for SNAP do work. The scandal is that they earn so little, they still qualify for this food benefit. Number one. Two, the administration went ahead and put this rule into place without really doing any homework or research as to who the population that they would be adversely impacting really are. We know that in that population, who would lose their benefits on the administration's plan are people like returning veterans. I've talked to many veteran shelters, many veterans organizations who are very concerned about this. People who served our country but who are having trouble reintegrating back into our communities. Homeless populations, people aging out of foster care. Those are the people that could get caught up in this and lose a basic food benefit. And so I thought it was particularly cruel the administration went ahead and did this. I'll just say one other thing. We considered this in the 218 Farm Bill. Congress considered this, and in a bipartisan way, we passed a Farm Bill that excluded this provision. And I'm proud of that fact. But I just point that out for the record because I feel very, very strongly about this. And there are too many people in this country who are hungry. There are too many people right now in the middle of this pandemic who will find themselves in a very vulnerable position. That's why I hope we can come to some agreement on a spending bill, a relief bill that will include additional increases in SNAP. So in any event, I don't want to belabor the point, but it's a raw nerve with me. But anyway, let me now turn. Let me just say to everybody again, I appreciate your testimony. Thank you for being succinct. I urge my colleagues who have questions to be succinct as well, so we can get through everybody here today. And with that, I yield to the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma, our ranking member, Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, you can surmise from the testimony of all our witnesses, there's a spirit of friendship and cooperation on this committee, and I give our chairwoman and our ranking member full credit for that. It means at the end of the day, we're likely to come together. It's not unusual for us at this point not to be there yet. That coming together usually happens in conference committees. We have a partisan divide today, but we would hope over the course of the weeks and months ahead to work through that and get to the same place. And we've been able to do that pretty regularly, certainly under my good friend Chairman Loy and ranking member Granger's leadership. And so I'm going to save a little time, if I may, I'm going to ask questions of the ranking members, although the chairmen are more than welcome to participate as well if they want to. But the aim is just simply to highlight the areas where we have some disagreements that we hope we can work through in the weeks ahead. So let me start with my good friend, our Chairman Emeritus, full committee, Chairman Rogers. Chairman, you touched in your testimony on some of your concerns about protections for the most vulnerable among us through the Mexico City policy and concerns about U.S. tax dollars that are going to foreign NGOs that promote and provide abortion services, concerns about the Kent-Caston Amendment, which ensures the United States does not finance or support organizations that support in part managing populations through coercive abortion or involuntary sterilization. Those have been protections that are pretty common in the appropriations bill and the state foreign operations bill. So let me ask you, if I may, are any of those protections still there? And do you have an opinion on what the consequences procedurally and politically of not having them there are? I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Well, thank you for that question, Mr. Cole. The bill maintains some of longstanding pro-life provisions stemming from the basic proposition that U.S. taxpayers should not be forced to fund abortions either domestically or abroad. However, I'm greatly concerned that the bill undoes some of the most important and fundamental agreements included in prior years to protect life. The bill attempts to unwind the president's expanded Mexico City policy, which, as you noted, requires foreign NGOs to agree if they want American tax dollars to support their work. They will not perform or promote abortion as a method of family planning. The bill includes a prohibition on funds to implement the policy and proposes to amend statutes making the prohibition permanent. The bill also directs $55.5 million to the UN Population Fund, which has violated the most basic respect for human life through its support for coercive abortion and forced sterilization in China, a severe human rights abuse in its own right. There was also a new change made in the bill this year that would weaken the longstanding Kemp Caston provision on coercive abortion. Until now, this act had been considered a non-controversial matter. Taken together, these are the most controversial and concerning provisions in this bill, and I was dismayed to see them included. You.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me move, if I may, to Mr. Fortenberry, and say before I do, the working relationship between Ranking Member Fortenberry and Chairman Bishop is really exceptional, and this bill is probably the closest to being acceptable, I think, from the minority standpoint. It tells you a lot about both of them and how well they work together. Mr. Fortenberry, we all obviously want to do everything we can to improve worker safety, especially during a time of crisis. In your view, does the majority decision to remove the line speed waivers during the COVID-19 emergency actually improve worker safety?
Thank you, Ranking Member Cole, for the question. If I could address one other thing right quick, I did want to go back to what Mr. McGovern was talking about. His comments are piercing and effective. Unemployment is traumatic for people. I've been unemployed. I've been underemployed. The social spiraling dynamics that it creates are really, really harsh. So any way that we can work together to look at areas that do need exemption, for instance, the USDA has already set up a process by which veterans with disabilities who are having trouble finding a job could gain exemption from this particular requirement, is one of the things he pointed out. I do think that's important. The other thing, too, is I think we all might be interested in this, is I just don't believe that the movement of persons who are working full-time on the public support system is fair. Upward prices or upward pressure on wages is an important dynamic for economic growth. And I think that's something that we can all agree on as we move toward a more just and equitable society. Regarding line speeds, we expressed some concern about this early on. I had several plants in my own district in which had this could be affected, or they could have been affected. I would need to go a little bit deeper to understand the full impact of this across the country. The conditionality of this was narrowed a bit, and so I think that's positive movement. But I would be happy to continue to work with Chairman Bishop to understand that we've got to be very careful in doing this. Of course, requiring line speeds that fundamentally protect laborers or workers, that create safe and positive environments, held in balance, of course, with assuring that we don't have any disruption of our food supply. We saw that how the pandemic hit meat processing plants. Just about a month ago, Chairman Bishop and I were on the phone with USDA to talk about how vulnerable the food supply was. So first principle, yes, absolutely. Worker safety. A lot of plants out there do need to be inspected, and we will not tolerate any unsafe conditions. We have to be careful, though, that a blanket rule doesn't disrupt the ability of people of goodwill who are properly managing their environments, and that could result in a disruption of food supply as an unintended consequence of this broad-based rule.
Thank you very much, my friend. Mr. Chairman, let me turn now to my good friends on my favorite subcommittee that I'm not a part of anymore, and that's the the committee chaired by Chairwoman McCollum and my good friend, the ranking member, Mr. Joyce. And before I ask my question, I want to thank them for the many, many Native American provisions that they added to the legislation, the generous funding levels, and make a prediction. They'll have to fight hard to hold that in conference where the Senate's concerned. The House, whether under Republican or Democratic leadership, historically has been the leader here in terms of trying to honor our commitments in Indian country. And frankly, Chairwoman McCollum and Ranking Member Joyce have just done an exceptional job at that, and that work is reflected in this bill, and I want to congratulate them on that. However, as my friend, the Ranking Member pointed out, there are incredible spending levels in this bill, lots of emergency spending. So while we all have an obligation to work and protect the environment, and both my friends do a good job, public land for future generations, we've also got an obligation to be good stewards and to live within the budget agreement of 2019, unless that budget agreement is revised. So far as I know, that has not taken place. So, Mr. Joyce, did the majority work with you at all to come up with the current, what I would view as excessive spending levels in the bill?
Thank you for the question, Chairman or Ranking Member Cole. And I can tell you that Chair McCollum has been a pleasure to work with, in that while we may not have discussed the exact numbers up to the date of this, we were certainly in agreement that we could do whatever we can to help Indian country and pay honor to those treaties and those deals, if you will, that were made long ago that have yet to be fully funded. So while I appreciate the question, the exact numbers I don't know, but I found that when it comes down and we get into conference, hopefully with the Senate in the near term, that we'll be able to work towards getting numbers that work for all of us and get these passed once and for all, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And turning finally, Mr. Chairman, to my friend Ranking Member Carter, disappointed that the language before us would bar any military construction funding in fiscal 2021, as well as the past 5 years from being used to secure our southern border. Rather than continue the post-impeachment vendetta against the president, any Democratic colleagues should be working with us and the administration on solutions to secure the border, restore troop readiness, and appropriately fund vital military construction projects. What are the national security ramifications of a prohibition on using military construction funding to secure the southern border?
Thank you, Mr. Cole. I really appreciate that question. And as you know, before I was blessed with the opportunity to serve military construction and Veterans Affairs, I chaired the Homeland Security part of our appropriations process for 6 years. And the seriousness of the border cannot be explained going to the border and seeing how serious it is. Ramifications of unknown people are really, we've had some bad people come across that border. So I hate to see anybody limiting any opportunity we can have to set up a situation that works. Currently, we probably have the slowest amount of people coming across the border currently, only very seriously because we don't have any jobs. And a lot of people come here for jobs. And so when unemployment is high in the United States, historically, people don't come from south of us. But south of us, all the way to South America, comes across that border when there are jobs. In turn, the drug trafficking has not let up. And the whole purpose of barriers on the border force people into the crossings where we have the better opportunity to interdict both human trafficking and drug trafficking. It's easier to catch them at the border crossings than it is in the middle of the river. And for that reason, we need these barriers were constructed. They don't need to be everywhere. They certainly need to be some places. And I think what we have done so far has been effective, very effective in areas which were real crisis areas on the border, and there's still some to go. So to limit the opportunity to defend our southern borders is serious as far as we are concerned. Texas and Oklahoma and those who see this traffic as they move through. So I hate to see us limiting the president's opportunities to do what is necessary as agreed by the professionals who work on that border. This is a political issue and it's been around for a long time. Let me say that Ms. Wasserman Schultz is very, very receptive to listening to me. She works well with me. I'm proud to work with her. She is the joy to work with because we agree to disagree on some subjects, and that's fine. That's really the way we ought to operate in Congress, rather than be disagreeable with each other. Let's just agree that we see the world through a different prism, and that's really a lot of the issues. But overall, we are Ms. Wasserman Schultz is a very easy to work with person and very fair and straightforward, but she defends her positions very strongly. And for from that standpoint, we disagree on that issue, the border too, but that doesn't mean we're disagreeable. And still, we'll keep our southern borders good.
Just for the record, I had the good opportunity to chair the ledge branch. My friend, the distinguished lady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, was the ranking member, and she knew the bill better than I did. So she basically treated me as the ledge branch chairman and made enormous contributions to our institution in that role, even from minority position. She's always a very good legislator. With that, Mr. Chairman, I want to yield back. I just want to make the point. I just wanted to highlight, these are the issues, honestly, that we're going to have to grapple with in the weeks and months ahead. And these are legislators that know how to get to the deal. So I'm really comfortable that we will get there, but we're not there yet. You can move them across the floor, but until the issues that I highlighted are dealt with, we won't be able to get them through the Senate. It won't be signed by the president. I know that's something we all want to achieve. And I'm very comfortable that the members you just heard, and certainly under the leadership of Ms. Lowy and Ranking Member Granger, have the ability to do that because they've done it before. They're awfully good legislators. With that, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And I would agree with the gentleman that all the people on the panel, Democrats and Republicans alike, are highly respected by all of us on the Rules Committee and members in this chamber. I now yield to Mr. Hastings if he has any questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I don't have any questions. I think the witnesses have been very comprehensive, and I'm deeply appreciative of them. I echo all of the positive statements regarding my good friend as well, Nita Lloyd. Many times here in the institution, folk don't know who others know, and Nita and I have traveled together and gotten to know each other extremely well, not only as it pertains to issues. I do wish to harken back to Mr. Fontenberg's statement and add some perspective, not only as it pertains to SNAP, but just generally. None of us know what the future holds with reference to this pandemic. But one thing is pretty certain, the global economy and our economy is not going to bounce back overnight. And we are looking at a couple of years, if not 3 or 4, before we could get back to the employment levels that we saw before this pandemic. And we need to be realistic in that regard, both as it pertains to our fiscal undertakings. And I think the Appropriations Committee has done a marvelous job regarding the ongoing circumstances that they're confronted with in trying to fashion an appropriations measure that will get us to the next level. Additionally, Mr. Fonberg mentioned a tragic situation where the mother had to drive her child a considerable distance in order to be able to access broadband. I wish along the way, I hope you all can find at least some language or colloquy that includes, and I have one of the districts that represents urban and rural. And interestingly enough, many of my rural areas are doing fairly well on accessing broadband, but it is in the urban areas of those old affordable housing measures that were built years ago that the technology companies are finding it difficult to even put broadband in them because of their poor structure, all of the things that we know about from asbestos and the whole 9 yards in that regard. So my county administrator in Palm Beach County has been actually making it widely known that when the libraries close, that parents can take their children in the near curtilage of the library and be able to access the internet. And that is in West Palm Beach, Florida. That is not a rural area. It is a very urban area. I might add the same thing with the superintendent in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This was Wasserman Schultz and I, Ted Deutsch, represent, as well as Lois Franco. And we find right there in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, an urban area, that children are unable to access broadband. So let's make sure that that language is not exclusive to just the rural communities, because there are urban communities all over this nation where children cannot access broadband. And as we move toward, however we do in schools, the technology is going to leave too many children behind. We need to be mindful of that. And I thank you all for the time. Bye. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Woodall. Dr. Burgess.
He's here. Wait a minute. He's unmuting. Dr. Burgess, say it again.
I did unmute and then someone muted me back. I assume the chairman did it.
Not intentionally, you know me.
Oh, yes, you're nothing if not fair. So thank you for the recognition. Thanks for the hearing. Let me just ask, I guess, Ranking Member Rogers, on the state and foreign operations part of the bill, one of the things that's concerned me for a number of years, and going back to the time when you were chairman, Mr. Rogers, is the issue of funding provided to the governments of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and language previously that those funds may only be obligated if the Secretary of State certifies that they're combating corruption, implementing reforms to strengthen their public institutions, and providing effective law enforcement, reducing poverty, and increasing economic growth. So if the certification cannot be made, funds may be reprogrammed to other Central American and Latin American and Caribbean countries. Last year, I offered an amendment to reprogram these funds to non-governmental organizations in those Northern Triangle countries that are providing services directly to the residents and benefiting the residents of those countries who are battling crime and corruption in their countries. Unfortunately, this amendment was not made in order, not considered by the full House. So, Ranking Member Rogers, I just ask, how often have the funds provided to the countries in the Northern Triangle of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras not been certified by the Secretary of State for full obligation?
The secretary just certified in all three countries, and that provision is in the bill and in the law.
So if I remember correctly, then that would be an improvement from past years when we've considered similar legislation.
That's correct. It has worked, not perfectly, and I wish it were even better, but at least it's a good start. And
Well,
the secretary will again have the opportunity to certify or not that they are improving.
well, as you know far better than I, we want to make it important to someone, we make it about their money. And I think those issues are important. And I know certainly from the time I've spent in those countries, visiting those countries, it is a need that, again, the citizens are not benefiting from the dollars the taxpayers in the United States are sending us. So I am very grateful to hear your report that you think it has improved in at least the past year and a half.
Mr. Burgess, my friend, Chairman McGovern, I just wanted to add to this because I know my friend Mr. Rogers remembers there was bipartisan anger at a representative from the State Department. They were holding up the money for 6 months that we had appropriated. So we have put very tough language in because it's essential that we help the people in those countries. And the administration's representative, I know my dear friend Mr. Rogers remembers when he came there, he really got hammered from both Democrats and Republicans. And we have to watch that very carefully. There was no excuse for this administration to hold up the money that was so needed desperately. Thank you for bringing up that issue.
Right, and certainly it has not just been this administration. The previous administration had its own share of problems in that regard, and certainly we all recall the difficulties that were present in 2014 and 2015 that led to some of the scrutiny being placed on how is the funding that we are providing those governments, are they using it appropriately? Are they delivering for their citizens who are the ones who so desperately need it? And if we ask the taxpayers of this country to send monies, are we certain that it's used appropriately? So I'm encouraged by what Ranking Member Rogers reports and what you report. I do hope you'll keep your I hope you keep your foot on the gas with that, because it is going to continue to be important when the problem is not obviously completely resolved, as Mr. Rogers points out.
Well, it's on my to-do list continuously, and we will, in a bipartisan way, we will keep an eye on it.
Very good. Judge Carter, as a ranking member of military construction, last time we considered one of these bills, in MilCon, the VA appropriations bills, we provided $135 million to address some of the housing conditions in the military housing privatization initiative. In fact, some reforms were included in the NDA last year when these conditions were publicly revealed, but it's not a problem that can be remedied overnight. Are the funds that are included in this bill, do you believe, are they going to further address the condition of military housing that is no longer meeting requirements?
That's a great question. Thank you, Mr. Burgess. I appreciate that very, very much, Doctor. Yeah, we've got a lot of substandard housing at a lot of posts and bases around the country. It's come to everybody's attention mainly through the media, and you can find bad and you can find real good, but it's still there. And we've got language. The chairwoman has put language in this bill for that. There's a restrictive provision in this bill that if we don't change the names of the bases that have Confederate soldier names on them, that no funds will be spent on military construction projects. And I'm concerned about that language being limited on a lot of military construction issues that we've got. We're definitely on top of in the bill as it is written, without that provision coming into place, to look into the housing issues that we have. It's a beginning. we've done a tremendous amount on barracks. We've done a tremendous amount on housing at the post that I represent, Fort Hood. And, but we still have some substandard 1960s, 1960s, 70s housing that really needs to be either major renovated or replaced. And we definitely have funds in there in the bill for that. And if you'd like for Ms. Wasserman Schultz to talk about that, I think she agrees with that.
Very well. Does the chairwoman wish to be heard? Well, Judge, I appreciate your efforts on this. I know it's important to you. It has been important to me for a number of years. And I agree with you. It's important that we get it right. And will suffer if it is not remedied appropriately. So I thank you for your efforts on this and thank all of our witnesses for being here today. I thank the Chairman for the recognition. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Torres.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to advise that votes have been called, so I'm not sure if we're going to continue to push forward.
Yeah, I don't think they've been called yet.
Okay. So first of all, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for being so supportive of the Rules Committee members, both Democrats and Republicans. I know that you and I talked superpower just a few short years ago. As other nations began to close their doors to travelers, American travelers into their countries because of the lack of response to this pandemic. Right now, amidst all of this, we have an opportunity to show our true colors, that we are standing by the working Americans in our communities to help them through this pandemic. We have an opportunity to show ourselves as a world exactly how we will rise to meet this moment. Because what we appropriate for is a direct reflection on what we prioritize for the years to come, our values as Americans and our commitment to our communities. This first minibus is a perfect example. It's a nearly $260 billion investment in how we will develop our agricultural and rural communities, how we will safeguard our environment, and how we will treat our veterans. It includes $70 million to accelerate our search for a coronavirus cure. It blocks President Trump from using his military funding to build his hateful border wall. And it has $1.5 billion to ensure the families of our military heroes have dignified housing. And as a mother of an Air Force veteran, it is personal to me. These families make incredible sacrifices. It is completely unacceptable that issues such as mold, vermin, lead are arising in military family housing. Everything I've mentioned only scratches the surface of what is included in this minibus. As a member of the Appropriations Committee, I am extremely proud of my work on this package. I made sure that the Export-Import Bank consults with the Department of Health and Human Services during moments of public health emergency like this one to make sure XM isn't helping to export medical supplies abroad that we badly need in our communities to fight COVID right here at home. I added a provision that ensures that we help uphold the rule of law in Central America, where strong men and narco traffickers are exploiting this pandemic to undermine justice and democracy. And I want to thank both Republicans and Democrats that have stood behind this. Even though these governments have invested millions of dollars in hiring lobbyists to lobby against our work there to ensure that we work to empower the people and not their corrupt governments. I included a provision that will help connect more veterans with a higher education option that is right for them, whether it's a state school, a minority serving institution, or a religious affiliated college. It's their money, it's their GI Bill, they should decide. COVID may have our economy at a standstill, but the federal government's obligation to the American people goes on every single day. And the appropriations package that we're passing today is just the first step to keeping that commitment. And I am proud of my fellow appropriators who worked so hard on it, and I am proud to vote yes. Mr. Chairman, with that, I will yield back.
Thank you, and thank you for the compliment that you were delivering to me. But unfortunately, the whole system froze because of a lightning storm. So maybe that was divine intervention. But anyway, thank you. And but I want to say two things. One is votes have begun. I would like, if possible, to get through this panel before before we all go to vote, so they don't have to come back. And I know Ms. Wasserman Schultz wanted to respond to something that was raised before. Let me yield to her first briefly, and then we will go on to Ms. Lesko.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that I'm still frozen on the video.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, you can hear me. So just let me just reiterate, particularly what Judge Carter said about how well we work together. I won't belabor that, but we do rarely disagree. When we do it agreeably. But the couple things I wanted to touch on. One, with the Confederate renaming language that is in our bill, it really is absolutely critical that, like our military leadership began until President Trump inserted himself inappropriately into their discussions, it is time to retire the names of Confederate officers who weren't named. These bases and installations weren't named in the aftermath of the Civil War. That these were individuals who were actually actively militarily supporting, taking up arms against the United States of America. It is the opposite of patriotism that all of our military installations represent, to honor an individual with the name of a military installation who took up arms against the United States. And so going through a process to rename them is appropriate, and we use our appropriations process to incentivize our executive agencies all the time, and so it's an appropriate use of that tool. We do have 30% of our military infrastructure that is rated as fair or poor condition, and so to continue to allow the president to rob our military of the vital funding that they need to rebuild our infrastructure is an outrage, particularly when the overwhelming majority of the citizens and people who live across our southern border are opposed to a border wall, and that we certainly shouldn't be redirecting and stealing money from vital military infrastructure that protects our national security interests to build a border wall that is not necessary, that is xenophobic, and frankly, with the mention of drugs streaming across our border, we don't have drugs streaming across our border in between our ports of entry. The drugs that are interdicted at our ports of entry, demonstrating that a border wall is not necessary to address that problem. So I thank the chairman for his indulgence, and with tremendous respect for Judge Clark.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions. I'll briefly say some of the things I don't like about the bills. One is I think it's too high of a spending in some areas, too high spending levels. It prohibits funds from being used for the border wall system, which is very important to the state of Arizona and the country. It overturns the administration's current Mexico City policy, allowing foreign organizations to receive federal funds even if they perform abortions. It provides about $56 million for the United Nations Population Fund, even though the administration has determined that that fund participates in the management of coercive abortion programs. And it permanently prevents this and any future administration from making changes to welfare programs that simply require working age, non-disabled adults without children to go back to work in times of low unemployment. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. And again, let me just to wrap it up. The work requirement rule is much more complicated. We're talking about veterans who are having trouble reintegrating back into our community. We're talking about children aging out of foster care. We're talking about homeless people. The majority of people right now who are on SNAP, who are able to work, do work. The sad reality is that wages are such that they still qualify for the benefit. I think this is a cruel attempt by the administration to throw people off the program, and we're going to do everything we can to block. It's just not right. Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I want to begin by thanking the chairwoman for shepherding these appropriations bills through in regular order, shepherding them through in emergency settings. Just thank you, and especially wanted to say something concerning the support of the State Department through this COVID-19, but really through kind of the whipsaw that they get from this administration. They were very helpful in an emergency setting to get a bunch of Coloradans back to the United States during this pandemic. And I just wanted to say I appreciate the support that the subcommittee has given to them. I want to thank Chairman Bishop and Ranking Member Thornberry for adding language about continued oversight by the Commodities Future Trading Commission on the price of aluminum, which has a tendency to suffer some monopolistic pricing. With respect to the interior, there was one thing, Chairwoman McCollum, you said that surprised me, and that it was easy to work with Mr. Joyce, and that did surprise me. But I guess it takes different people to work with various individuals, and you must have. It's the Great Lakes that I think makes it easy for you two to work together. But I did want to thank you and your staff for working with my office on these two big laboratories that the United States Geological Survey has in Colorado, where for the last 7 years we've been trying to get a new laboratory built because the roof is literally ready to fall in on hundreds of geologists, engineers, scientists, technicians. The building was built back during World War II as part of the Remington Arms plant that was producing 6 million bullets a day for World War II. And so we've tried a number of different creative ways to get this laboratory rebuilt. And I'd just like to ask you, Chairwoman McCollum, for your commitment, continued commitment, to work with my office and the administration through the end of the year to try to get things back on track, because the building had been permitted, was ready to turn dirt and work with the School of Mines, and then COVID-19 hit and brought everything to a standstill.
Well, first off, Mr. Joyce is a joy to work with.
Oh,
it's the fresh air, the fresh water, and freshwater fish. We have that in common. It just makes you smile and makes you happy. I will be upholding the House position. And when you go into conference, I have found in the past that we work together as a team to uphold the House position. Your language in the bill will be part of the House position, and I will defend it strongly.
And I would just, if other things come available, I'd like to be working with you and your office and the committee to get that thing built, if we can get it built. Because in Colorado, during this economic downturn, those projects that are shovel-ready, we need to take advantage of those, and certainly we do in Colorado. So appreciate your willingness to continue to work with me and my office on this laboratory.
Mr. Joyce and I stand ready to assist you.
Thank you very much. I hope Mr. Joyce will after my comments, help on this subject too. Last thing is, there was another kind of a shocking thing that Judge Carter said, which was that Ms. Wasserman Schultz has strong opinions. I've never seen that to be the case. And I was surprised by that, but I want to thank the two of you.
I resemble that remark.
And the committee as a whole for making additional sums available to the VA Epilepsy Centers for Excellence. This was something that was passed a number of years ago. Funding has been held level, but we know that our servicemen and women, our veterans, because of traumatic brain injury and PTSD, the incidence of epilepsy has continued to increase. And for the VA to be able to study this and provide services is very, very key. And I just want to thank you for that addition to that line item. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I've been told Mr. Raskin has no questions. Ms. Scanlon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the witnesses who testified here today. I know the appropriations process is a bear under the best of circumstances, and we all really appreciate the work you've done under these far from best experiences. You know, several people have talked about the significant investments that are being made in WIC and SNAP, and that's so critically important in my district. Philadelphia is, under the best of circumstances, one of the hungriest cities in the country, and we know that those programs keep families afloat, and now they're under just extraordinary demand. I've spent far more time than I care to think about over the last few months at food drives and food distribution centers, and seeing families who've never had to rely on free food before, and seeing families who are really struggling even with that. So really appreciate those investments, really appreciate so many of the great programs that are funded in here, including many of those mentioned by Ms. Lesko. So I just want to thank you again for your work on the appropriations bill, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the chair and all the subcommittee chairs for their tremendous work here. And I do want to say, as a sole New Yorker, I think out of all the people on this screen, I just want to take a moment. I know that Leo DeRocher famously said in 1946, as the manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, that nice guys finish last. But he apparently never met anyone like Nita Lowey, who is not only an extraordinary legislator, someone who is iconic in the state of New York, but could not be more gracious, more helpful to legislators. She has been extraordinary to work alongside. And I will say, before I came here, I was in the state legislature for many years, and she, of course, is legendary throughout New York. But I consider it one of the great privileges of my career to have spent the last 2 years as her colleague. She's been incredibly helpful, and of course, is a great American patriot, and has done so many extraordinary things in her career. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank her for representing New York so well and being such a tremendous legislator. So God bless you.
And I am very grateful to you, and we still have a few more months, but I look forward to continue to stay in touch and be helpful in any way I can. Thank you for your very, very generous remarks.
And the reality is that you'll probably be before the Rules Committee 1,000 more times before the end of the year. Ms. Shalala.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to acknowledge Nita Lowey. I had the pleasure when I was secretary of testifying at appropriations, and she was on my appropriations committee. She asked tough questions, but she has a soft heart, and she's led appropriations with extraordinary skill. I strongly support this appropriations package, which provides urgent and essential resources, not only for the American people, particularly for my fellow Floridians. Among the provisions in the State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Bill is emergency funding for coronavirus preparedness and response and relief. There's much we don't know about this virus. The one thing we do know is that it respects no borders. South Florida is tragically now the epicenter of the pandemic, specifically my district. And we're also the capital of the Americas, and we know too well how diseases can spread. This emergency funding will save lives both abroad and at home. The SFOP bill provides robust funding to advance our global priorities and strengthens our international partnerships that are critical supporting American influence and effectiveness across the globe. This includes specifically restoring funding for the World Health Organization, which this administration has threatened and is trying to cut off. Nearly 150,000 Americans have tragically died from COVID-19. It is more important than ever that we're able to share information and best practices with our international partners. Many of those international partners were trained at the CDC over the years. We simply cannot afford to play politics with WHO funding. I led the American delegation to WHO for 8 years. I am well aware of its limitations and its strengths. We need WHO more than ever, and because, as I said, this virus knows no borders. This bill also supports the people of Venezuela in their fight to restore democracy to their country. And an amendment I filed with Representative Murphy increases the funding made available for programs to promote democracy and the rule of law in Venezuela. I'm hopeful that the amendment will be made in order. I'm also proud that the legislation provides security assistance to our ally Israel, fully funding our commitment to Israel's security. Lastly, in this division is the funding for U.S. aid, COVID-related education assistance. I strongly support this provision, especially funding for U.S. chartered universities with main campuses in the Middle East, as these universities are a key to educating the next generation of leaders and sharing American values abroad. Also in this package is the Agricultural, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration and Related Agencies Bill. My family, half my family lives in rural North Dakota and Minnesota, and broadband is critical to the future of rural America. In this country, no one should ever be hungry, especially children, as this pandemic has made it only harder for hardworking families in my district and across our country to put food on the table. And this bill provides robust funding for food and nutrition programs, which have never been more important. The bill provides more than $25 billion in mandatory funding for child nutrition programs. This is an increase above the fiscal year 2020 enacted level, and the bill provides over $68 billion in required mandatory spending for SNAP, and this includes $3 billion for the SNAP Reserve Fund. My friend Marian Edelman once said, if we don't stand up for children, we don't stand for much. But also in this package is Interior, the Environment and Related Agencies Bill, which provides funding for meaningful action on climate change and protects our environment. I'm particularly proud of the provisions that provide robust funding for the Department of the Interior bureaus working to restore the Everglades, including the National Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the South Geographic Program. I strongly support the Great Lakes investments. It's personal for me. I grew up on Lake Erie, and I care deeply about the Great Lakes. Lastly, among the most important provisions, this package upholds our commitment to our troops, investing in housing and medical care and programs to reduce veterans' homelessness. Simply put, with this minibus, we are fulfilling our obligation to our planet, to American values, to our veterans, and to our children. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matsui.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I know I'm probably last in line. I'll try to make it short. But first of all, I'll probably thank Chairwoman Lowy many, many times, and every time I see you, I'll thank you. But you've done a tremendous job, and you're wonderful, wonderful. And I want to thank the panel for testifying today. This is an important bill. The funding included in this bill will have a significant impact in California. And my district provides important resources to contain the coronavirus epidemic, to increase food security, and make critical investments in infrastructure. It is really one of these bills that people think, wow, what does it contain? Listen, it contains so much in here that affect our constituents, our communities. So I thank you all very much for this bill, and I look forward to supporting it, and I look forward to supporting this on the floor. So thank you very much, and I yield back.
You have Mr. Woodall here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I unplugged by mistake. So, anybody else wish to test, any questions or comments? Mr. Woodall?
I appreciate the gentleman from Colorado speaking up on my behalf, but I have no questions. I thank the witnesses for being here.
And Ms. Matsui, I just want to make sure, did you finish? Because I unplugged I get disconnected for briefly.
I could continue, but I did finish.
Okay, all right. All right. Are there any other members who wish to ask questions of this panel? Seeing none, I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony and their patience, and you are excused. So you're done. So I ask unanimous consent at this time to insert into the record statements from Mr. Cicilline and Mr. Cohen. And without objection, the committee stands in recess subject to the call of the chair. Now, members should vote on the first two measures. So we're going to vote on this measure and then the one right after that, and then return to your computers, and we will then proceed. So with that, the hearing stands in recess subject to the call of the chair. Rules Committee will come to order. We now welcome our next panel, Mr. Stauber, Ms. Titus, Ms. Jackson Lee, Mr. Crawford, Ms. Gonzalez Colon, and Mr. Gianforte. I would just urge, I want to welcome everybody here. I urge you to be as concise as you possibly can, because as you know, we're in the middle of votes, and we'd like to see if we can get through as much of this panel as possible so we don't have to have you all come back again. But in any event, having said that, let me yield to Mr. Stauber for any opening remarks you may have.
Well, thank you, Chairman McGovern and Ranking Member Cole, for the opportunity to discuss my amendment, HR 7608. First, Amendment number 9 to Division C is a straight strike amendment removing language that is bold and insulting to my district. Iron ore is used to build America. Iron ore has won 2 world wars, and our iron ore is the cleanest and strongest of any nation. If we want renewable energy, we need iron ore mining. One wind turbine contains 300 tons of steel. Unfortunately, my Democrat colleague from St. Paul, Minnesota, authored a bill that includes language that stops mine plans from existing iron ore operations in my district. The Mintac mine, the Minorca mine, and the North Shore mine combined employ more than 2,000 Minnesotans. Section 435 of Division C is a message to these employees that their jobs don't matter, that their families don't deserve a paycheck, even during this global pandemic. Mr. Chairman, China is responsible for more than half of the world's steel production today. China's steel is poor quality, and it's built with horrific labor and environmental standards. I don't know about you, but I want northern Minnesota to continue feeding the world's steel needs and not China. This provision furthers China's grasp on the global steel market. This provision favors China over northern Minnesota. Sadly, it confirms a fear that I and my constituents have held for a long time, that my colleague from St. Paul wants to end all mining in northern Minnesota, whether it be precious metals like copper, nickel, cobalt, and rare earths, or aggregates like stone, sand, and gravel, or iron ore, which builds America. I ask that my amendments be made in order and supported on the floor, and choose northern Minnesota workers over China and its allies, like my colleague from St. Paul. Amendment number 10 to Division A draws attention to harmful report language because of an ideological opposition to any kind of mining. This provision was inserted by the majority to create another unnecessary hurdle to a mining project in my district. Mr. Chairman, we need mining in this country. For example, cobalt is necessary to build electric cars. The International Energy Agency estimates that you need around 20 pounds of cobalt for each car produced. As we continue to buy electric cars, our need for cobalt will continue to grow. And who is the top producer of cobalt in the world? According to the IEA, the Congo is at the top by a massive margin, supplying more than 71% of the world's resources. Second place, Russia, with 4%. What else is the Congo a world leader in? Child labor. About 40,000 boys and girls are forced to work in cobalt mines to produce these minerals. It does not have to be this way. My district contains 88% of our country's cobalt reserves. Union workers in my district are ready and able to mine the cobalt and other minerals needed by the United States and others. Unfortunately, the report language in this bill requires other foreign countries to sign off on mining projects that take place in northern Minnesota. In other words, this report states that a foreign country has to give us permission to mine in our own lands in this country. Just last month, I introduced an amendment to the highway bill in markup that would have required the Secretary of Commerce to certify that our electric vehicle infrastructure is not built with child labor. It passed in committee 43-16. But what did the majority do? They stripped it out in the middle of the night before it could reach the floor. I never thought child labor was a partisan issue. Mr. Chair, another amendment of mine asked for a modest increase for the forest products timber sale program. Our logging communities from northern Minnesota have been hit hard by the pandemic, and doubly so with the rash of mill closures. This amendment increases funding for both the National Forest System and the forest products line item, allowing our loggers to access both the Chippewa and Superior National Forests in northern Minnesota and throughout the country. This increase, coupled with further legislation to benefit our loggers, is the least we can do for these communities. And lastly, I offer an amendment to delist the gray wolf. The gray wolf still haunts northern Minnesota. President Obama's Fish and Wildlife Service rightfully delisted the gray wolf in 2013. Let me quote then Fish and Wildlife Service Director Dan Ash, and I quote directly from his press release. An exhaustive review of the latest scientific information shows that we have accomplished our goal with the gray wolf. This is a simple ask and a rightful one. If you agree with President Obama and his Fish and Wildlife Service about delisting the gray wolf, then make this amendment in order. Mr. Chair, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cole, members of the committee. I appreciate your indulgence. I want to focus my remarks on two amendments, Titus number 45 to the State and Foreign Operations Division, and Cohen number 6 to the Interior and Environment Division. First, Amendment 45. This makes the U.S.'s position crystal clear on Turkey's decision to change the status of the world-renowned Hagia Sophia from a museum to a mosque. This 1,500-year-old site, am I boring you? I see somebody yawning up there. This 1,500-year-old site holds a special place in the hearts of people of many faiths and backgrounds, and this decision has been decried by many in the international community. As a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Hagia Sophia is an architectural masterpiece that's universally valued. It has served as a Greek Orthodox cathedral for nearly 1,000 years, and it holds great spiritual and historical significance for Orthodox Christianity. United States Commission on International Religious Freedoms Vice Chairman Tony Perkins said the commission, and I quote, condemns the unequivocal politicization of the Hagia Sophia, an architectural wonder that has for so long stood as a cherished testament to a complex history and rich diversity. Both Christians and Muslims alike ascribe great cultural and spiritual importance to the Hagia Sophia, whose universal value to humankind was reaffirmed with its inclusion in the United Nations UNESCO World Heritage List back in 1985. My bipartisan amendment encourages the State Department to denounce Turkey's action to change the status of Hagia Sophia and to engage with Turkey for the purpose of returning its status to a museum. I want to thank Representatives Bilirakis, Cicilline, Deutsch, Schneider, and Pappas for joining as co-sponsors of this amendment. For the preservation of its architectural, artistic, and cultural history, for support of religious minorities in Turkey, Greek Orthodox, and Christians around the world, and for respect for the site's universal value to all humankind, I urge the committee to make this amendment in order. Now I'd like to speak about Amendment 6 to Title C offered by Mr. Cohen, along with myself, Chairman Grijalva, and a number of others. This bipartisan effort would refocus $11 million, or about 10% of the overall appropriation for the Bureau of Land Management's Wild Horse and Bureau program to be used on safe and effective fertility controls as a means of population management on the range. To put this in context, the BLM spends approximately 70% of its annual budget on costly roundups and holding of wild horses. This has proven to be an ineffective and expensive strategy to try and address concerns about overpopulation on rangelands. Excuse me. By comparison, the BLM has never used more than 4% of its annual budget on fertility control measures, including the use of PZP to address these issues without the need of mass removal of the horses off the range and into these pens. I'm thankful for the efforts of Chairwoman McCollum to ensure that BLM remains prohibited from killing healthy, unadopted horses, selling them to kill buyers, or allowing them to be killed and processed into commercial products. But I strongly believe if we are serious about addressing concerns about appropriate management levels, we must ensure that BLM is dedicating funding for a humane fertility strategy. Excuse me. I serve as a representative for the state of Nevada, which is the home of the largest population of wild horses in the nation. These taxpayer-funded roundups and removals are not only a costly and ineffectual management strategy, but they also endanger the lives of these beautiful animals, as evidenced by the horrific death of a young mare witnessed during a roundup just this past weekend in Utah. This horse, which was rounded up using a low-flying helicopter, was run into a metal fence, breaking her neck. Instead of being immediately euthanized, the horse was dragged away in chains. This is just horrible. We can and should do better to protect and manage our wild horses, which are iconic symbols of the American West. The Cohen number 6 amendment is a step in the right direction, and I urge you to make it in order. We have to take steps towards a strategy where BLM puts real dollars towards fertility treatments, because the status quo is just not working. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. Let me just urge everybody, if you're not speaking, please make sure you are on mute. I now yield to Ms. Jackson Lee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much, and thank you to the Rules Committee for this opportunity. Let me offer my amendments in the following order. Amendment number 65 will designate $1 million to combat the trafficking of endangered species. My amendment made a good bill better by providing $1 million focus to combat the transportation of the remains of endangered species to bring down the desire to go after these endangered species. So many of us remember a few years ago the brutal killing of Cecil the lion. At that time, I introduced and sought the support of my colleagues as original co-sponsors of this bipartisan legislation, Cecil the Lion Endangered and Threatened Species Act of 2015. We were successful in the House. This amendment is now offered in the same spirit. It is heinous and tragic to kill these animals that represent the greatest of our combined society and ecosystem. I ask my colleagues to support amendment number 65. Amendment number 66 provides funds to allocate dollars provided for global health programs to fight against the practice of female genital mutilation, which still continues. I've been a dedicated champion against this practice for a long time, while even working with former Congressman Joe Crowley of New York to introduce legislation targeted at supporting the elimination of this ludicrous practice, mutilating young women. Female genital mutilation, cutting, FGMC, comprises all procedures that involve partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reason. This practice is rooted in equality, and these funds will reinforce our commitment to these girls around the world. My amendment number 21 in the Ag, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration, and let me acknowledge this mini bus one for the great work that the appropriators did in providing much opportunity for issues that are very much in need. But Jackson Lee Amendment clarifies that nothing in the bill restricts the authority of the Secretary of Agriculture or any federal agency head from providing assistance and benefits to victims of trafficking as permitted by 22 U.S.C. Section 7105B of the Victims Trafficking and Violence Protection Act of 2000. I held the very first district hearing when I chaired the subcommittee on transportation and homeland security on this question in Houston, the epicenter of human trafficking. Perpetrators of crime know that they are more likely to evade detection and punishment when their victims refuse to assist or cooperate with law enforcement. That is why they make it a point to instill fear in their victims for their own safety or that of family and loved ones. Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. It affects millions of men, women, and children. Food assistance public benefits are a necessity under this particular law to help them survive as we find these heinous actors and perpetrators on innocent persons. The Jackson Lee Amendment number 42 increases funding by $2 million for a USDA agency that provides grant research for 1890s Land Grant University, which are 28 historically Black colleges. This organization, this Institute for Food and Agriculture, works to improve our nation's food production through agricultural research, economic analysis, extension, and higher education. In the midst of food deserts and of COVID-19, where everywhere districts are distributing food to people who are in need, this is an important amendment to collaborate with our historically Black colleges and universities, which have a history of agrarian engagement, starting, of course, in the midst of the Emancipation Proclamation as they began to open up to educate the descendants of enslaved Africans. I ask my colleagues to support amendment number 42. I ask my colleagues to support amendment number 31, which provides $5 million to highlight the need to support culturally competent federal, state, and local and public health and environmental protection efforts to address cancer clusters impacting overburdened communities in the Gulf Coast, which is home to Refinery Road that runs from Mobile to Houston, Texas. We have been dealing with creosote that has also impacted the Fifth Ward community that has been poisoned by various railroads or poisoned the land around these historic neighborhoods utilized by some of our railroads. This particular amendment will reinforce the resources that are needed by these communities, which can document cancers, lung, bronchus, esophagus, and larynx throat cancer, the eons of individuals who are suffering from cancer because of the creosote contamination that I requested a cancer study from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and they determined that extreme cancer came from this contamination. This particular amendment will address that question, which I think is extremely important. Let me conclude my remarks by indicating that I have a letter of support supporting the amendments dealing with the creosote amendment that comes from the City of Houston Director of Health, Stephen L. Williams, and Lauren Hopkins, Chief Environmental Science Officer as well. In addition, I want to make mention of the fact that I had an amendment that focused on the public law establishing the National Emancipation Trail Study Act. I've consented to work with the national parks to ensure that this study will get done. But I think it is important to note that there were any number of amendments, any number of letters of support, and I ask unanimous consent to place the letter from the City of Houston and the letters from the Emancipation Economic Development Council and the letter from the Emancipation Park Conservancy relating to my amendments and the work on the Emancipation Trail. I thank you for your consideration and ask my amendments to be made in order. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
And without objection, the materials you requested to be part of the record will be part of the record. I now yield to Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of my amendment to Division B, Agapropes, Crawford 31. I also appreciate my colleague, Representative Kustoff, for co-sponsoring. My amendment is simple. It keeps taxpayer dollars from going toward research at universities if applicants are receiving other funds from China. We know that the Chinese government is committed to finding any opportunity to lie, cheat, or steal from the United States. However, I'm baffled as to why our universities allow Chinese nationals to come to campus and conduct privileged research. Adding insult to injury, we're also bankrolling researchers with alarming connections to Chinese talents recruitment programs. In January of this year, a Harvard professor affiliated with China's Thousand Talents programs was arrested for aiding the People's Republic of China. In my home state of Arkansas, 2 rice researchers from China were charged with conspiracy to steal rice production technology in an attempt to take proprietary science back to China. I appreciate the steps of this administration to protect the U.S. from the Chinese government's malicious behavior. However, Congress must also step up and codify protections. The House China Task Force Member Day allowed us to highlight opportunities to further secure our nation against China, and hope the House will take up the strong legislative proposals recommended. And I respectfully ask that my amendment be made in order. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gonzalez-Colon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all the committee members for allowing me to testify today. Ranking Member Cole. I want to testify on my amendment number 33 to Division B of HR 7608. As you may be aware, Puerto Rico does not participate in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, like the 50 states, DC, US Virgin Islands, and Guam. Instead, we have a Nutritional Assistance Program, or NAP, that is typically funded at $1.9 billion every year, and it serves over 1.3 million participants on the island. Because of the limited funding, Puerto Rico needs to enforce strict income and other eligibility guidelines to challenge access to the program, and provides monthly benefits that are at times between 30 and 50% less than in SNAP. Having said that, Puerto Rico has had a series of consecutive emergencies in the past 3 years, started with the Hurricane Maria in 2017, following with earthquakes, which are still ongoing, and currently the COVID-19 pandemic. All these emergencies has brought an increase in demand for NAP for my constituents. Keep in mind that these are constituents that have lost their jobs or notices a dramatic decrease in working hours, diminishing their ability to purchase food for their families. Right now, since COVID-19 emergency began, we have over 150,000 new NAP participants, bringing the overall number to 1.4 million participants. Mr. Chairman, we have been managing these increases in demand by relying on disaster supplemental funding. Most recently, the Family First Coronavirus Response and the CARES Act provided a total of close to $297 million for NAP. And while every dollar for this program is much appreciated, this allotment is not near enough to what is needed. And to make matters worse, it will run out in August the 1st, next week. That means that we're going to return to the base level grant funding, and my constituents are at risk of experiencing a sharp decrease in their benefits, or even getting dropped from the program in the middle of the global pandemic. This is not the first time we have asked for additional NAP funds, and it will not likely not to be the last time, given that the COVID-19 emergency period is ongoing, and we will continue to be impacting demand for the program. But I sincerely believe that the main issue and the problem is the block grant. So we need to boost NAP at the base level to place the island in a better position to handle the emergency and the fluctuations in demand. That is why I offer this amendment, which seeks to increase the fund for NAP by $528 million for fiscal year 2021.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I know our staff has worked with you on the amendment. Hopefully we can make it in order, but thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Mr. Gianforte.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern and Ranking Member Cole and all the committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to testify about my two amendments. The First Amendment would allow land management agencies like the U.S. Forest Service and BLM to quickly remove dead trees after wildfires to focus on reforestation and rehabilitation. In 2017, over 1 million acres burned in Montana. Livelihoods were threatened, habitats were destroyed, and whole landscapes were scarred. The fire season is getting longer each year, further depleting our resources. My common sense amendment would allow the agencies to quickly respond to rehabilitate our forests. In the interest of forest health, this amendment would require that at least 75% of the burned out area be reforested. An environmental assessment and public input would still be required in order to move forward with any project. These landscape-sized projects are direly needed. The 2017 lodgepole fire in Montana burned 270,000 acres. That was one fire. Quickly responding to the effects of the fire will protect our public lands into the future, restore our forest health more rapidly. I urge your support to make this amendment in order. I also submitted an amendment to the military construction title to continue to ensure the safety and security of our nuclear warheads. On Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, the current weapons storage area was constructed in the 1960s. The new weapons storage and maintenance facility would meet all current security and anti-terrorism requirements. Due to the difficult conditions and exacting specifications in the initial contract terms, the Air Force needs an additional $25 million in order to keep the project on schedule. I urge the committee to include my amendments, making them in order, and I thank you for your time, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the entire panel. Your testimony is pretty straightforward. I have no questions. Let me ask anyone on the panel if they have any questions. Mr. Cole?
Thank you very much. I have no questions, but I do want to make a quick comment.
Sure.
My friend, Ms. Titus, no member who has Elvis greet you at the door, the Rat Pack on the wall, and has a staff that's not only capable and hardworking, but I know as a former neighbor reflects the hospitality that her district is famous for is boring. So it's always a pleasure to have my friend up here testify. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think Mr. Hastings has no questions. We'll go to Ms. Torres.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Burgess? Dr. Burgess there?
I don't think he's here, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right, good. We'll go to Mr. Perlmutter.
I'll pass.
Ms. Lesko?
No questions.
Mr. Raskin?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Scanlon?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Morelli? Mr. Morelli?
No questions, sir.
Ms. Shalala?
No questions.
Ms. Matsui?
No questions.
Let me thank the panel very much for being
Chairman,
here.
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman.
Yes,
I'm
we're,
so- it-
yes. There's no.
Yes. Additional submission, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
All right. What do
This is
you
Shirley Jackson Lee. You
Yeah.
can hear me. Yes, Mr. Chairman. On amendment number 31, I want to submit into the record the Texas Health and Human Services report on the assessment of the occurrence of cancer clusters and their updated report that found leukemia, esophagus cancer, larynx cancer, liver cancer, and lung and bronchus as unanimous consent. And then the second would be dealing with amendment that was relevant to Emancipation Trail. And it is a number of individuals that support historic emancipation trails dated July 22nd, number of named members. And I would ask.
Without objection, I would just urge anybody, anything you want to submit for the record, and I would have your staff submit it to rules.documents@mail.house.gov before the conclusion of the hearing, and we'll enter it into the record happily, okay?
Thank you.
This panel is dismissed. We now, and now we go to our next panel. Let me see who we have here. Mr. Graves, Dr. Burgess. Oh. Is that it? I think that's it. So we'll begin with Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. Just very quickly want to cite two amendments we have filed. One of them pertains to the VA. Mr. Chairman, back in May, we passed a bill through the House of Representatives that authorized over $2 billion worth of new construction for VA major medical facilities, which is certainly needed. However, there is a lease process that was designed to help improve the efficiency and allow for the VA to be more dynamic in responding to the needs of our veterans in terms of their health care needs. Yet, just to give you an example, there are 13 different leases that would cost over the next 20 years, $275 million. However, the Congressional Budget Office has scored those leases at $800 million. Mr. Chairman, These are leases that are replacing existing leases, yet CBO is refusing to deduct the cost of the existing leases that obviously would be abandoned and heaping who knows what other cost. Whenever, simple math, you multiply the 13 leases times 20 years, you get $275 million. We should be deducting what the existing leases cost, which would then bring that number substantially down. However, whatever CBOs do with their voodoo math, they're getting to $800 million. Mr. Chairman, this amendment is simply a subtraction and an addition to highlight the dysfunction of this process. Most importantly, Mr. Chairman, to highlight the adverse impact this is having on our veterans, those that we should be working to make sure we are providing the best care to. You have all seen the awful statistics about suicide rates, PTSD, and the other acute medical needs of our warfighters. So, Mr. Chairman, I would appreciate y'all's acceptance of this amendment, which is simply designed to highlight this dysfunction and to get this on a trajectory to where we can fix this problem and allow for simple math and common sense to apply, that existing leases that are going to be canceled should offset the cost of any new leases the VA enters into. And then lastly, we also have an amendment pertaining to ARS research in the Ag Department of the bill. And there is a sugarcane research station in Houma, Louisiana, where the field, the greenhouse, and one of the laboratories is located out. And then the other research facility is located in the middle of town. They were supposed to be consolidated. This was supposed to be done years ago. It's inefficient. It puts people on the highway when they shouldn't be there. It's all supposed to be out at the research field station. And so this once again just does an addition of subtraction and highlights the issue of the additional need for ARS construction funding. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to join you today and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Is Dr. Burgess back?
Not yet, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Graves? Well, yeah,
I do.
Okay, what happened here? Ms. Shalala.
Thank you. I want to ask my friend, Mr. Graves, I thought the GAO did the leases. Does the VA do their own leases?
You are correct that the GAO is involved in the lease process. However, these leases have been stuck for years with the inability of the VA or the GAO to approve these leases because of the scoring issue. And Congresswoman Shalala, I mean, this is a simple math problem that there is no one in the private sector would ever come to these cost conclusions that Congress or CBO is applying to these. And so that insurmountable $800 million figure is what is preventing these leases from moving forward. But yes, GAO and the VA are both involved.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Graves? Mr. Graves, Mr. Cole, no questions on your side, just to be double check?
No, none that I can see.
Okay, then you can go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I think Mr. Grothman has shown up as well.
I'm sorry. I should have two amendments. Is that correct?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Is that accurate? You guys got two?
I'll look, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay. One of the two is concerning food share. Because I know you guys are busy, I'm going to ask that one be returned to me. The other amendment is okay. The other amendment concerns an exhibit in the Smithsonian regarding communism. I think we have a very fine Holocaust museum, but I think right now, due to current things going on, I think it's important that young people find out about the history of communism. It is still relevant in today's world, given the problems we are having with Russia and China. I don't think you can understand American involvement in Vietnam or Korea unless you understand the history of communism and Marxism in particular. Therefore, I am asking a given amount of money to be set aside in the Smithsonian for an exhibit dealing with communism, in particular dealing with what's happened in Russia, in China, in Cuba, in Cambodia. I also want people to be aware in which historically, at a time when we worry about foreign influence on our elections, the degree to which the communists infiltrated the U.S. government.
Are you, have you finished? I want to make sure you finished, Mr. Griff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Are you finished? You're done?
Yes.
Thank you. I just look, I found that amendment. I just want to, in all honesty here, just apparently there's a budget point of order against your amendment because I think it increases outlays, which puts us in a difficult spot, but I appreciate the amendment. Are there any questions of Mr. Rothman?
I guess I have to make a comment.
Yeah, well, of
which I just say to Mr. Grotham, ordinarily I appreciate when you come up, but today with this kind of stuff, I'd say you want to put it next to the exhibit of Joe McCarthy. With that, I yield back.
I don't know that there is a Joe McCarthy exhibit, actually.
There isn't. That's my point.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Grothman?
Mr. Chairman, Burgess here.
It's Dr. Burgess, yeah.
Not really a question for Mr. Grothman. I would just point out that we are the all-powerful Rules Committee, and of course, we can offer exceptions and make Mr. Rothman's amendment in order and provide the necessary waivers. That's certainly within our purview to do that. So I just urge the chairman to consider that when they undergo their deliberations on allowing amendments to appear and not fall back on the budget point of order provision.
And I appreciate the gentleman's commentary, but he's been on the Rules Committee for a long time and knows that it's been a long-standing tradition of the committee not to offer budgetary waivers on individual amendments. So I appreciate that. There being no other questions, Mr. Grothman, are you free to go?
Okay, time to run back and vote.
Yeah, Dr. Burgess, I know do you want to testify?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd be pleased to testify now. I have two amendments, and then I want to speak on a third. The first of my amendments is number 20 to Division C of HR 7608. And this is an amendment I've offered in the past on the appropriations bill that would put a funding limitation on the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to utilize Title 42 Special Pay Authority. Title 42 Hiring Authority gives the Department of Health and Human Services the ability to incentivize and expedite the recruitment of scientists and other experts working in the cutting edge of public health. Congress authorized this authority for Department of Health and Human Services alone in the 1940s when it was known by another name. However, in 2006, this authority was extended to the Environmental Protection Agency by an appropriations bill. It did not go through the normal authorization process. 2015 report by the EPA's own Office of Inspector General discovered that the EPA did not properly demonstrate a need to use Title 42 hiring authority, nor did it provide clear and convincing justification for its continued use. I submit that that's further proof that the EPA's use of Title 42 special hiring authority is inappropriate and should come to an end. The ability of the EPA to hire outside the regular general services scale must first go through regular order by one of the authorizing committees. So I urge support of this amendment so that Congress has time to fully review this problematic hiring authority before the appropriation of additional funding. Next amendment would be amendment number 72 to Division C, the entire environmental part of the combined appropriations bill. This amendment specifies that none of the funds provided by Division C of the bill may be used to restrict the development or operations of oil and gas pipelines. America needs to commit to the all of the above energy strategy that will expand our energy infrastructure This amendment prohibits any funds from being used to restrict the development or operations of oil and gas pipelines. Opponents of American energy, and America's energy independence have targeted pipelines that carry oil and natural gas around the country to consumers and to export terminals. These groups seek to use the federal government to halt the development and operation of these key pieces of infrastructure. Recently, a federal judge halted the operations of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Federal intervention was a key contributor to the cancellation of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and these acts have in fact destroyed jobs and damaged America's energy security. The federal government must remain a neutral referee in regulating the operations of America's critical infrastructure. For those reasons, I do urge that this amendment be made in order. And finally, I do want to speak on amendment number 53 by Representative Dingell. And this prohibits funds from being used to implement, administer, or enforce the final rule, 85 Federal Regulation 1684, entitled Update to the Regulations Implementing the Procedural Provisions of the National Environmental Policy Act, published by the Council of Environmental Quality in the Federal Register on 16 July 2020. Dingell's amendment prohibits federal funds to be used to implement, administer, or enforce President Trump's modernization of the NEPA policy. That NEPA burdensome permitting procedures have blocked the development of important infrastructure systems, such as pipelines, wind farms, interstate highways, and electric transmission lines. The Trump administration's reforms to NEPA are essential to building a modern infrastructure to improve the lives of Americans, reduce pollution, and rebuild our economy. These changes include establishing reasonable time limits, streamlining interagency coordination, simplifying language, and reducing the unnecessary paperwork, amongst others. The amendment as written would slow our nation's economic progress, hinder the development of newer, cleaner energy systems. For that reason, I urge that this amendment not be made in order. And I thank the chairman for the recognition. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of Dr. Burgess?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Cole.
No questions other than I obviously support my friend's position. But I would ask unanimous consent to submit a statement of Congressman Norman in support of his amendment number 52 to Division A.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I can't hear anything. I can't see anything. So I think that will, no one else wishes to testify?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the Burgess here again. I would say you're welcome to join us in the hearing room if that would make things easier on your ability to see and hear. We'd be pleased to have you here.
Yeah, we're trying to follow the best advice of the attending physician. I'm in the room right next to you. I just want to make sure I'm not overlooking anybody. Okay, you just knock if I overlook you. All right, there's no other people wishing to testify. That closes the hearing on HR 7608. At this point, the chair will entertain a motion from the distinguished gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Shalala.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee report a structured rule for consideration of HR 7608, the State Foreign Operations, Agriculture, Rural Development, Interior, Environment, Military Construction, and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Act of 2021. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate on the bill, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee, print 116-59, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the provisions of the bill as amended. The rule provides that Clause 2E of Rule 21 shall not apply during consideration of the bill. Section 2 of the rule provides the following debate. Each further amendment printed in the Rules Committee report not earlier considered as part of the amendments en bloc pursuant to Section 3 shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, may be withdrawn by the proponent at any time before the question is put thereon, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. Section 3 of the rule provides that at any time after the debate, the chair of the Committee on Appropriations or her designee may offer amendments en bloc consisting of further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report not earlier disposed of. Amendments en bloc shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 30 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their designees, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the Rules Committee report and amendments en bloc described in Section 3. The rule provides that during consideration of the amendments described in Section 2 and 3, it shall not be in order to use a decrease in the overseas contingency operations funds to offset an amendment that increases an appropriation not designated as overseas contingency operations funds, or vice versa. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. I yield back.
Thank you very much. You heard the motion from the gentleman from Florida. Is there any amendment or discussion? Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I know my friends in the majority are anxious to honor all their promises and commitments, but we're running out of time here for a more open, transparent process. And traditionally, as you know, although I acknowledge we're in difficult time, traditionally, we try to make a lot of amendments to appropriations bills in order because members of both sides have a very important wide range of interests there. So I would hope that, Mr. Chairman, we could bring this particular bill before us as an open rule and we'll move.
Okay, you heard the motion from the gentleman. Any discussion? Hearing none, the vote is on the Cole amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
No. Noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, being so close to us, I'm sure you heard us, but we won't have the opportunity for recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Torres,
No.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter,
No.
Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin, Mr. Raskin,
Mr. Raskin, unmute.
Yes, no.
Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon,
No.
Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli,
No.
Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala,
No.
Ms. Shalala, no. Ms. Matsui,
No.
Ms. Matsui, no. Mr. Cole,
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall,
Aye.
Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess,
Aye.
Mr. Burgess, aye. Mrs. Lesko,
Aye.
Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. I was surprised that Mr. Burgess voted yes, because I thought I heard in his previous testimony that he asked for an amendment to be blocked, but in any event, I am now, any other amendments to the bill? Mr. Cole, Mr.
Yes. I would like to be heard on amendment.
Okay, Dr. Burgess has an amendment.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thanks for reminding me. I do wanted to strike consideration of amendment number 53 from Division C. So I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee strike amendment 53.
Group 6 is voting now.
Yeah, we know. We're going to be given hopefully a 10-minute warning to get before we have to vote. So the whole vote. So, Dr. Burgess, go ahead.
Sure, right. Well, I just spoke on this a minute ago. The Trump administration reforms to NEPA are essential, building our modern infrastructure. I don't think this amendment is helpful, and I would urge the Rules Committee to strike it from the rule.
Okay, you heard the gentleman's amendment. And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
No, being the chair, the noes have it.
And Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Torres,
No.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter,
No.
Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Askin,
No.
Mr. Askin, no. Miss Scanlon,
No.
Miss Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli,
No.
Mr. Morelli, no. Miss Shalala,
No.
Miss Shalala, no. Miss Matsui,
No.
Miss Matsui, no. Mr. Cole,
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall,
Aye.
Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess,
Dr. Burgess, unmute.
Aye.
Mr. Burgess, aye. Mrs. Lesko,
Aye.
Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
I'm gonna readjust my neck brace. I have whiplash from open rule to denying amendments. But anyway, any other amendments? Any further amendments? Mr. Cole, is there any amendments on your side?
Gentlemen, we're ready to proceed.
You ready to proceed?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. Hearing none, the question is now on the motion offered by the gentleman from Florida. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Being the chair, the ayes have it, the motion is agreed to. Mr. Cole.
Chairman, on that, the voice vote was so overwhelming, we simply have to ask for confirmation, so we request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Torres,
Aye.
Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Perlmutter,
Aye.
Mr. Perlmutter, aye. Mr. Askin,
Aye.
Mr. Askin, aye. Miss Scanlon,
Aye.
Miss Scanlon, aye. Mr. Morelli,
Aye.
Mr. Morelli, aye. Miss Shalala,
Aye.
Miss Shalala, aye. Miss Matsui,
Aye.
Miss Matsui, aye. Mr. Cole,
No.
Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall,
No.
Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess,
No.
Burgess, no. Mrs. Lesko,
No.
Mrs. Lesko, no. Mr. Chairman,
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
The ayes have it, the motion is agreed to. Accordingly, Ms. Shalala will manage this for the majority.
And Mr. Chairman, distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess, will manage for the Republican.
Mr. Burgess will do it for the minority. I thank everybody for their patience in helping us get through this before the last vote, and without objection, the committee is adjourned. Thank you.